with the bad hand.
So we're listening just briefly there to former President Bill Clinton, who is the warm-up act for Barack Obama at this rally in Bristow, Virginia. Virginia, one of the all-important swing states, which it's believed will be critical, all-important in deciding the eventual winner of Tuesday's presidential election. Mitt Romney has spoken just recently in Colorado, and, well, it's worth just mentioning that Virginia 4 years ago voted for Barack Obama, who won a 6.3% majority. And he'll be hoping for, of course, the same. Now, BBC News, it's time for a look at the world through the eyes of correspondents based here. It is Dateline London.
Hello and welcome to Dateline London. Two big topics today: the future of the United States under President Romney or President Obama, and the future of the European Union as Chancellor Merkel prepares to meet Prime Minister Cameron and wrangle over the EU budget. My guests today are Henry Chu of the LA Times, Mina Al-Oraibi of Asharq Al-Awsat, Janet Daly of the Sunday Telegraph, and Dmitry Shishkin of the BBC's Russian service. Very good to see you. Well, United States first. And after one of the worst storms ever to hit the eastern seaboard, President Obama and Governor Romney rewrote their campaign plans for the last few days before Tuesday's presidential election. The polls still show it's neck and neck. So what difference would a Romney president make? How serious is the partisan brinkmanship over the economy? And whoever wins, is the world's great superpower likely to be less important in the future than, say, in the past 30 years? Just beginning with Romney himself. What difference would it make domestically, his views, for example, on the economy and on social matters?
Well, we certainly have seen him tacking towards the center in these last few days of the campaign, and I think that's a good sign in the sense that the electorate that we talk about it being incredibly polarized in the U.S., really there is a lot of middle ground that both candidates have to appeal to. But that said, President Romney, I think, would spell quite a big difference in terms of American domestic policy from vowing to repeal health care legislation that Obama put in, which was, of course, actually the singular achievement that he had as governor of Massachusetts, putting in health care, but he wants to renounce it on the national stage. That would be one important thing, possibly on abortion rights and women's reproductive health, as well as some finance reform that was put in. He's also vowed to either scale back or repeal. So I think we'll actually see quite a change under President Romney.
Do you think, I mean, it's clear that in terms of, you know, he's a business of America's business kind of guy, and that's part of his sales pitch. But on some of those social issues, do you think he actually cares? I mean, on matters like abortion, is that something that you say, but you don't really do very much about? You know it'll get mired in congressional rows and so on.
Right. No, certainly he's had to make some of those noises throughout the campaign, particularly to secure the nomination. Absolutely. Will that be his primary focus if he were to be president? No. However, he will still have a constituency within Congress that he has to actually cater to, and for some of them, it actually is important, so he can't ignore it altogether.
Mina, you were bureau chief of Asharq Al-Awsat in Washington for a while. I mean, what difference do you think a Romney presidency would make?
Well, huge difference in terms of having only a one-term Obama presidency, so to speak, the legacy of the first African-American president and what that means, historically speaking. I think on the ground, domestic policy remains to be the economy. And I think where the economy is going, healthcare continues to be one of those issues that really dominated a lot of the Obama administration's time because of the importance of what healthcare stands for in terms of how society is going in the U.S. And they've been very clear that they would want to repeal that. So I think it will make a difference. Of course, for those of us on the outside, we're all looking at what a Romney presidency or a second term of Obama would mean for foreign policy and international affairs. There are lots of people who are holding their breath on Syria, waiting to see what happens after the election, how much time will be given for Syria. And I think the same goes for Middle East peace process, for those of us just focusing on the Middle East, but also wider relations with China and so forth. So I think there would be a sort of shift, even though there is a Consistent,
yeah.
that's it.
Well, we'll come to some of those foreign policy issues in more detail in a moment. Domestically, the economy, and also healthcare, because actually that is an economic issue too, for various reasons, because it's about taxation.
Romney, the big difference is that Romney understands the problem, and it's not just the problem of the United States, it's the problem of Europe, and in fact, all Western democracies, and that is the assumption of what used to be called the centre ground of politics, that you can have a free market economy supporting a universal entitlement society. That is the problem of the beginning of the 21st century for all of the Western democracies. They are trying to finance universal social democratic entitlement programs on the treasury sort of receipts, the tax revenue produced by a free market economy, and it can't be done. It is unaffordable.
Does Romney
Understands that.
I mean, Paul Ryan.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But does Romney get that?
Doesn't matter. Romney and Ryan are very much going to be a joint ticket. Ryan was the hero of the Republican Congress for his budget, his alternative budget. He fully understands, has a comprehensive understanding of this fiscal problem. And the Romney administration, if it ever exists, will come to grips with that in a way that Europe ought to be coming to grips with. The real difference is that Obama is, bizarrely, because America's usually 20 years ahead of us, in fact, they seem to be 20 years behind now, trying to sleepwalk America into precisely the dilemma that Western Europe is in, which is an unaffordable entitlements program.
Except that when we talk about budget choices, those are, of course, political choices. So Romney is also a presidential nominee who says that he wants defense spending to be ratcheted up to 4% of the economy, right? So is that supportable? I mean, the last time we had a president who also had a major platform of tax cuts, deregulation, and defense spending was Ronald Reagan. And that
defense spending can be increased and can be cut by the federal government. But an entitlements program, once people come to expect, a population comes to expect a universal entitlements program, which nearly half of the population of the United States now expects and is dependent upon, that is a political problem. That is a crisis that has to be faced.
Well, some people think that's not a political problem. They think it's a political solution because it solves problems.
Not if it's unaffordable. Not if it's unaffordable. What's happening in Europe is that we're gradually moving away from the democracy bit and moving into a socialism, a planned economy, a command economy, because the democratic socialist thing doesn't work. You can't have the democracy, the free market, supporting this socialist program.
Dimitri, in terms of the difference that he'd make domestically, and we'll come to how it would be seen in Russia as well, I mean, what difference do you think it would make?
Internationally?
Domestically in the United States. Do you? I mean, well, there's two clear views here, two different views.
Clearly, the jobs and the economy are the main issues which they both, whoever wins, will have to tackle. And regardless of who wins, the extent of the problems is such a big one that you can't really close your eyes and start doing something else, because the real issue is jobs.
Now, and how do you think it would be seen by Putin and by the Russian?
That's a very interesting question, because I think historically Kremlin would prefer to be dealing with Republicans rather than Democrats, because for Kremlin the tougher stance Washington would take on Kremlin and Russia as a whole, or Soviet Union in the past, the better it would be to rebuff and to take even tougher stance backwards. And I think that Kremlin is never quite sure how to deal with people who want to be nice to you, like Obama, for example. And if Romney says that there is
this is an ingenious argument here.
Russia is our main geopolitical foe, regardless whether he was treated, whether he was understood properly or not, or whether he was misinterpreted. Regardless of that fact, whether it is a geopolitical foe or military foe, I don't really.
So, has Obama missed the trick in not saying Romney, he gets Putin's vote? Is that what he should
I think, frankly, Russia is not very high on both candidates' agenda. Frankly, internationally, I agree that China is probably and Syria will be the one, and Russia would like to be very high on America's agenda, but in reality, I don't think it's true.
And if we're talking about China, to address the question that you posed at the beginning, which is, will America be as important 30 years from now as it was in the last 30 years? Well, I think there's a distinction to be made between as powerful and as important. And I think as powerful, potentially not. Obviously, we have the rise of other countries like China, India, Brazil. But in terms of its importance, if we're really looking in 30 years at two major powers, say the U.S. and China, then I think in importance, it's actually going to still be quite up there, because you'll have one country which is an undemocratically run, undemocratically elected country, and then don't you want the counterbalance of the U.S.? And so I think in terms of actual influence, it's
certainly
going to be,
influence.
And do you see, perhaps all of you see, I mean, America's a Pacific power as well as an Atlantic power, and Europeans and British particularly seem to forget this. We've seen a greater emphasis in the Obama administration on the Pacific.
Asia.
We've seen troops going Asia, troops going into northern Australia, a small group, but still very significant. I mean, do you see, whoever is president, that's going to continue, isn't it? That drift, Pacific drift.
I think that engagement
The
absolutely has to be there, yes. That will continue, for example, with patrolling the shipping lanes in the South China Sea. That kind of thing is going to happen regardless of who is going to be president. However, you do have differences in terms of how they'll approach China. So Romney seems more confrontational, or is willing to take it to China and the rulers in Beijing more so than Obama is, for good or ill.
He says that he's going to declare it a currency manipulator.
on day one.
Unlike the United States, which obviously doesn't manipulate its currency, or Europeans who don't, or British who don't.
But China is doing a particularly pernicious thing with the dollar at the moment, and that's he's going to, I mean, the danger is that what he's saying could precipitate a trade war, which would be very serious, because all those cheap goods that are going into America that the consumers love come from China.
Correct.
Do you think there's, I mean, do you think partly there's some disappointment with Obama after the Cairo speech in the Middle East, but however, broadly in the Middle East, the sort of things Romney says about Israel and Iran perhaps don't go now so well?
Yes, I think with Obama, I mean, again, the events of the last 2 years have kind of changed what any president would have wanted to do in the Middle East. So events are taking speed in a way that nobody could have expected.
You mean Arab Spring events,
exactly, and so forth.
Changes.
Domestic. Now, there are certain things. For example, Afghanistan. It's strange how very few people have even spoken about Afghanistan during the election campaign, but partly because there's the 2014 deadline for withdrawal, and it kind of is set already on pace, regardless of who becomes the next president. For the issues of Israel and Iran, well, Israel, we had almost like a love fest during the election season, and we know, all the politics of the U.S., so there isn't that much difference. But I think with Iran, there is a sense that with Romney, there would be much more hawkish stance than you would have with an Obama administration. Again, Romney's advisors on foreign policy are quite clear. Some of them, people like John Bolton, who are, advising him, were very hawkish on Iran and made it very clear that they believed in a military strike.
One of the things that's interesting about Obama's foreign policy, and it's an issue that's been almost ignored by what's called the mainstream media in America, is the Benghazi incident and the Libya, the consequences for foreign policy, for Obama's foreign policy, the murder of the ambassador, and the fact that this was obviously a planned terrorist attack and not what they were originally claiming, which was a spontaneous demonstration which just happened to have rocket launchers attached. So now it looks as if Obama's claim to have smashed al-Qaeda once he'd killed Osama bin Laden is gone. That has disintegrated. So what now? What is left of Obama's claims to have succeeded in terms of the terrorist threat?
I haven't found a single Arab commentator who agrees that Al-Qaeda is anywhere near smashed.
Exactly. And as an ideology, it's not smashed. I mean, even if they've killed bin Laden, as an ideology, there are still those. But having said that, the Benghazi attack, I think, was so politicized that they've had to step back from it because it was about who knew what when the attack on Ambassador Stevens happened. And I think that actually discredited the Romney campaign, where they could have actually spoken more about the wider issue of ideology.
Hang on.
Well, let's not get entirely sucked into one issue, because the other big thing that's kind of obvious is whichever president is elected, it's almost certain that the House will be one way and the Senate the other, or it will be a 50-50 nation, as it has been for many years. And this atmosphere has not been great. So whoever it is will presumably come in and say, let's all pull together, we're all Americans, and yet again it will be very difficult.
It's very interesting to avoid gridlock. What Clinton did in the second half of it, once he got locked in by a Republican Congress, is he really did go bipartisan. He abolished the federal welfare program. He did a lot of things that the Republican Congress wanted. And when Obama had the same situation in 2010, he didn't. He absolutely insisted on ramming through Obamacare and alienated the Republican Congress, and as a result hasn't been able to get a budget passed. Now, would he in a second term become more bipartisan? It's unlikely.
Well, it's possible. I mean, I think if we can hope that if he were to be reelected, that he would actually have learned from some of his mistakes. I'm not sure Clinton is necessarily the best example, because he actually faced down a Republican Congress and had a government shutdown, and therefore was able to discredit Republicans to a certain degree.
But also, for Clinton in particular, he was more successful and more popular facing down a Republican Congress than he was working with Democrats who he constantly felt undermined him. I mean,
and he did go halfway.
Yes.
He met the Republicans halfway.
He knows how to press the flesh, and absolutely.
Dimitri, whatever happens in the United States, one of the suggestions is there is this question of the fiscal cliff by Christmas. There's the problems of working with a Congress, a lame duck Congress, and a new Congress. And we sort of underreport outside this 50-50 nation and how difficult it can be given a nasty atmosphere.
I think the important here is the legacy of Obama, of the first term of Obama, how the world perceives it. Because you remember that 4 years ago, that was this sentiment of hope that things might change in America and how America would sort of almost sort of perform on an international stage. Maybe the perception might change. And in a recent BBC World Service poll, which was conducted, I think, last week in 20-odd countries, the majority of population in those countries would prefer, if they had a right to vote in US elections, they all would vote for Obama, because Obama still carries this sort of hope but whether this is correct or incorrect, this is probably too simplistic an explanation.
Yeah, but just a final thought. Does anybody think the way Obama's handled the hurricane has helped him?
I don't think it has hurt him. I don't think it's necessarily produced the bounce that they were hoping for. But he has been maintaining his lead in many of the state polls and many of the swing states.
Meaning Ohio, Virginia being they're very close though, aren't they?
And I think also Governor Christie of New Jersey, and after so many attacks on Obama, to stand out and say, actually, he's done a good job. I think that was a moment where we don't often see in a divided United States, and that's bipartisan, to actually see somebody step up and say, you know what, he's doing a good job as president. That doesn't change the election race.
I think that was terrific for Chris Christie. I think it was really good for Chris Christie. Won't do a thing for Obama. I didn't think that there was any... I mean, the kind of electrifying moment that he might have had, a George Bush moment with the megaphone or a Ronald Reagan moment with the satellites, I mean, that didn't happen because he doesn't do emotion. So there was no great climactic move toward Obama. I don't think it's made any difference at all.
It's interesting because from the outside world, I just returned from Barcelona where I was on a break last week, and I was watching things developing on telly, and actually from the way the news were reported, Obama as Mr. President, as sort of taking care of things there and then, influenced me as a foreigner just like, the president is actually not in the White House.
That's very much the world media. I was in America last week and watching the American media here, and there was not that feeling
at all.
Not that feeling.
Okay, let's move on, because David Cameron and Angela Merkel have quite a bit in common. Instinctive fiscal conservatives, practitioners of austerity, yet as they meet this week ahead of the big European summit on the budget later this month, their common cause over cutting spending is undermined by one simple fact. Germany's world role depends on being at the centre of the European Union. Britain, especially after a major defeat for Mr. Cameron in Parliament this week, is on the fringes and may move outside. Is it crunch time for Britain and Europe? I mean, you would think that because of the fiscal conservatism, because of where Merkel comes from and where Cameron comes from, if any two big countries can cooperate, they should be able to cooperate on this budget matter. But they can't.
Yeah, but the trouble is that the structure of the European Union makes that virtually impossible. If Angela Merkel wants to respond to her own electorate and Cameron wants to respond to his own electorate, which is perfectly appropriate, there's nothing invidious about that. That's the business of elected governments, to put the interests of their own electorates first. Then they have to put the national interests of their own countries ahead of the structure which is supposed to supersede those nation states, and that's the inherent contradiction of the European Union. And this problem is going to solve itself because the European Union has become untenable.
What it says it's not just Britain's going to leave; it's all going to fall apart.
It's all going to fall apart.
All right. Well, you heard it first here.
No.
By
Lots
what?
of people said it.
By Tuesday?
Lots of people said it 10 years ago.
Yeah. Well, they've been saying, some people would call that wishful thinking. But anyway, Dimitri,
there was a wonderful entry in the Newsweek blog last week about if EU was formed now, we wouldn't ever have a problem like rebates, funding for farmers, because the way they want to tackle the problems which were in place 20, 30, 40 years ago, they want to apply the logic of today to something which is completely
well, it was a time of post-war food shortages and a coal and steel community, which is very...
Exactly, and now it is exactly going to your argument of trying to pay for something which is essentially socialist by market economy.
But Dimitri, maybe they need a bigger budget in order to rethink.
I don't believe so. I think they might need it for something else, and I think that in the last 6 or 7 year period it was important because the EU was expanding, whether whether it was explaining for a good reason or bad reason, that's another question. I believe so that they probably need to be realistic about what they want to do, and just...
The thing is, Janet rightly says that people have to talk to their own electorates, but there are many reasons for thinking that in some ways the German electorate is quite similar to the British electorate. Although they want to be plugged into Europe, they don't like paying taxes. That goes
for
to
other
something
people,
for other people, particularly.
But I think that's
a long 500-year tradition.
True,
in
but the
Germany.
big distinction is that they want Europe to succeed. I mean, they are completely signed up to the European experiment. Now, that doesn't mean that they're in favor of the way it works out mechanically, but conceptually, they definitely want that to be there because they realize that that is, as you said earlier, how they exercise their influence is through a European Union. Now, what I find curious about here, living in Britain, is that it is such an issue and that you hear about the possibility of Britain eventually withdrawing, there being a referendum, which is all well and good. I have yet to hear anybody actually to make an argument on behalf of Europe here. Maybe it's not out there, I don't know, but there are plenty of politicians who will say that they are pro-Europe.
Oh, talk
but
to
I
Ken
don't
Clark.
hear.
Talk to Michael Heseltine.
But quite a few
there are
quite a few
in the
business people
public
who say we have all kinds of problems with it, but we'd rather be in it because it's our big market and it gives us a degree of stability, and we like dealing with the euro because it's one currency for all these people.
It's the big corporations.
The big corporations
want it. Small businesses don't want it, but the big corporations want it because they want a corporate universe. It suits them.
Well, I think the UK or England, we'll have to see what happens with the Scottish referendum also 2014, likes the idea of being in Europe politically. They're on the world stage, it's important for Britain, but the EU is going through an incredible economic crisis and a crisis of identity. And it's there that Britain is not comfortable and wants to say, we still have the pound, we are still strong. Even within its own domestic problems, it still remains to be seen if the EU can survive the euro crisis. And that is something that Britain wants to step away from. And part of the budget argument is within that. If you didn't have the same euro crisis that you're having now, it would be so much less politicized, and I think more people would be buying into it.
What about the narrow point, Janet, about Cameron and the Conservative Party? I mean, Ed Miliband and the Labour Party are also quite interesting. We might get to them in just a sec. But Miliband said, you're John Major all over again. You can't control your party. You've got to deal with these terrible problems over Europe. You're weak, was what Miliband said.
Well, there's something in that. But you can't...
One of the few occasions which you've agreed with Ed Miliband.
But I mean, he's just... obviously, he's scoring a political point that's very useful to him. But this business about you can't control your party... It isn't a bunch of lunatic fringe right-wingers within the party who are saying this. The people who are Eurosceptics now are, in fact, voicing the opinion of the majority of the population. The opinion polls now show that more than half of the population in Britain would actually thinks we would be better off outside of the European Union. This has become mainstream now. So when Cameron says that he was going to ignore or he's going to overrule that section of his party, he's saying he's going to overrule popular opinion, which is a funny thing for a Prime Minister to say.
So I think that it's interesting about the opinion polls. When the majority or the large part of populations would like to leave EU, would they want to leave to travel to Spain on their holidays or Portugal and keep changing money and losing on exchange rates? Probably
That's
not
the
on these smaller things.
They do have to change their money now because they have to change it for euros.
What they really think about is that why on earth my benefits are being cut or my family's benefits are being cut, whereas the EU budget is not being cut according to the same degree.
They are also vaguely aware that there are now droves of French people swimming across the Channel to reach Britain to escape the 75% tax rate.
Just to pick up Nina's point, so you see a future post-2015 when we could have Britain out of the EU, Scotland out of Britain, what used to be the UK no longer being on the permanent 5 of the UN Security Council, and some new country that is...
How did the UN Security Council come into that?
Well, because the United Kingdom's got a permanent seat on the...
Absolutely.
But why would England have?
Oh, I see. Because right. I'm sorry, I wasn't following your logic.
So I'm just wondering what you envision for the future.
The fact that the UK has a permanent seat on the Security Council is an interesting point vis-à-vis the argument that without Europe they have no role in the world. Britain has always had a very strong role in the world, partly because of its alliance with America, partly because of its history as a sovereign country which has had a remarkably successful war record. So I don't think that there's a problem about being outside the EU in terms of world influence. On the contrary, I think the world influence of Britain is likely to be lost lost and diluted if it gets swamped by its membership of the EU.
I don't think it would be swamped. But I think if it chose to opt out of the EU, then there is definitely a shift. The alliance, for example, with Germany, its position now, for example, the E3 plus 3 with the talks with the Iranians were so strong because it was Britain, Germany, and France. And I think that cannot be underestimated in 21st century politics.
But you know, there are an awful lot of people in Germany who would like to see Germany opt out of the EU and who feel that that would be a solution to the economic crisis.
There's some people outside Germany, including Greece, who would quite like that.
Absolutely.
I think they'd like to throw people out of the EU rather than.
And I think also the other side of this argument, though, too, is an EU without Britain is also itself hobbled, I think. I mean, then you will have a certain diminution of influence, I think, by having Britain on the outs. If they were to lose the seat on the Security Council, I think a lot of their global influence actually would decrease.
Well, I mean, that again is why £350 million was announced for Trident replacement and the whole idea of nuclear weapons. Why does anybody keep nuclear weapons now? It's for that seat on the Security Council.
And just in terms of how, that vote, as Janet said, many of the people were reflecting the views of the British people. But I just wonder, in terms of Cameron going in to talk to Merkel and then going forward, threatening a veto at the budget negotiations on November the 22nd, how is that strengthened or otherwise Cameron's hand? In other words, do you think he's been weakened by that vote?
By the vote that we just had in Parliament. Yeah, well, I think the narrative is that he has not been able to exercise the kind of discipline that he ought to as party leader, because in this parliamentary system, he is the head of the party, and he's supposed to be able to whip people in line. That's why they have whips. By exercising the veto, he's not going to get what he wants regardless. So exercising the veto is actually clever, or the right way to go domestically, because it can only shore up his support amongst his own people.
One of the consequences, because of the complications of European financing, is if he vetoes it, actually Britain's contributions could go up from
Exactly.
But that's not an argument that will fly.
But I think it also helps his negotiations with Merkel and with others when saying, look what I'm dealing with domestically. You've got to give me some leeway. So I think it actually helps his hand in negotiations with the EU.
But maybe actually what would have been more sensible would be to say, look, we're a great party, the Conservative Party, let's have a free vote on this. This is a real issue for many of you, because there would be actually many more people who would rebel, who felt sympathy for the rebels, but couldn't face going into the lobby with the Labour Party.
Yeah, but I don't think he dares to call a free vote, because then the whole party would walk out from under him.
So he'd well, and just a final thought, 30 seconds left. What did you make of what Labour did? It clearly was a move to embarrass the government, but does it also suggest a political consensus towards Euroscepticism?
Yes and no. I mean, it was obviously wildly opportunistic. He wanted to embarrass Cameron by making the vote as large as possible, and it gets him into trouble with his own Europhile wing. But there are an awful lot of Labour voters who feel as Eurosceptic as any Tory.
We'll leave it there. That's it for Dateline London for this week. We're back next week at the same time. You can keep up to date with the programme by following on Twitter at Gavin Esler. But for now, goodbye. We didn't have time to...
Hello there. Frost and fog and maybe a few icy patches for northern parts of the UK. Here it will be a cold start to Sunday, but we can look forward to some sunshine and fewer showers. The wetter weather and maybe windy weather for a time is going to be across the south, where we're seeing very heavy rain developing, maybe a bit of snow caught up in that as well as it drives up from the West Country towards the southeast of England and East Anglia. It's going to take a long time to clear away, and as it does, it turns very windy towards the south coast. Showers follow on behind across Wales, southwest England. Those will be heavy. Maybe some hail and thunder in there as well. A few showers in Northern Ireland. Much of Scotland will be dry. Northwest of England enjoying some sunshine, but I think wherever you are, it's going to be pretty cold. If you're heading to any bonfire or fireworks in the evening, we've got the clearer skies across the north. Showers continue in the south well into the night as well, keeping the temperatures up by Monday morning, but a touch of frost again anywhere from northern England northwards. Again, some patchy mist and fog too. A few more showers to come for Monday as well.
On the final straight, Mitt Romney and Barack Obama campaign in the crucial swing states on the final weekend before the election.
You know I tell the truth, and you know I'll fight for you and your families every single day as hard as I know how.
He says it has to stay this way. I say it can't stay this way. He's offering excuses. I've got a plan.
Superstorm Sandy forces fuel rationing in New Jersey as more than 1 million homes and businesses remain without power. Rebels in Syria attack a military base used to mount air assaults on opposition fighters. Hello, welcome to BBC News, broadcasting to our viewers in the UK and around the world. I'm Adnan Nawaz. Also in this programme, China is hit by wild weather as sandstorms, blizzards and heavy rain affect large parts of the country. And Obama and Romney go horn to horn in a very different electoral tussle. Hello there, we've got plenty coming up, but first we're going to go immediately live to the town of Bristow in the American state of Virginia because President Barack Obama is speaking there at one of his final election rallies. So let's have a listen.
The economy and policy that's so critical to our future, you've got to ask yourself, who do you trust?